Alice Peel says all kids are good enough. It's the core message of a book of tools she's put together for children, their parents and their teachers. Alice, who's a primary school teacher and co-founder of a mental health venture, says all of us can get in a funk sometimes. She wants kids to understand the normality of that feeling and that there are tools to better deal with those moments. The book lays out the science of the brain and replaces parts with animals, making brain functions easier to understand and remember. Topics include how to get out of a trap, how to be brave, how to be resilient when you don't want to be. Alice, welcome to the show. Good morning.
Hi there. Thanks so much, Catherine.
What were you seeing and experiencing that made you think a book like this was needed?
Well, do you know, I was a primary school teacher and absolutely loving my job with fantastic kids. And what I could see was a bit of a pattern, though, if kids really struggled to emotionally regulate or if they were, being disrupted by friendship dilemmas and had no kind of tools, or if they got really down about not getting an award. And I could see the pattern that then sort of wrote off the day for them. And often they weren't aware of the fact that they actually had incredible character strengths that they were putting to use in other ways that weren't necessarily getting recognized. And then they weren't really feeling fantastic about themselves. And it was a bit of a downward spiral. And so I could see that if they could learn some of these skills and, just repeating them, they actually started feeling better about coming to school, felt more connected, felt like they belonged and so on.
How do we define the feelings that children can have? Sometimes when they're younger, they can be quite transient. They bounce back very quickly. For others, it takes longer, or they may have a lack of self-confidence that kind of imbues everything. Can you give us an overview of what you're talking about?
Well, I think the first thing is for us and for kids, for us as well, but for kids too, is that all feelings are welcome. I think sometimes we feel really terrified of the big and uncomfortable ones. And it's a bit like Susan David says, feelings they're just data. They're just telling you that something's going on. So if you're angry, perhaps there is an injustice. If you're jealous, maybe you need to talk about it and focus on the things that you are doing well. And I think, in terms of feelings, it's just building up the same way we build up our vocabulary in other areas of life. It's about building up a really rich emotional vocabulary so we can describe what we're feeling. And, so often, and I talk about this in the book as well, so often something like envy or jealousy is disguised as anger. And we feel ashamed about feeling envious of a friend. Whereas, in fact, if we can name it, we actually take away a bit of its power, and then we can make better choices, hopefully.
What age is this for, Alice? What sort of age range?
Well, it's for 8 to 12-year-olds, because that's what our program is.
Great.
Is it really kind of dedicated to.
So talk us through how you begin what you were just talking about there, which is half the battle is actually recognising what you're feeling and then working through why. How do you help children understand what their emotions and their feelings are and where they come from?
Yeah, I think just naming them, obviously, like I said. Also, you naming them as an adult in their life. In terms of how this all came about, though, as I said, I was a teacher, but also before that, I'd been studying public health, and then I was lucky enough to go on and study something called positive psychology, which many people are familiar with. It's a terrible name, but it's actually a really interesting study in terms of looking at how humans flourish. And that gave me ideas, and I was lucky enough to meet Christina Freeman, my beautiful co-founder, and begin Grow Your Mind together. And really, from the very outset, it was about how do we get people to be more comfortable with their feelings.
So with kids, for kids, we think of the amygdala as, being that sort of hyper alert, on the lookout for threats and very quick sort of response part of the brain. How do you explain, I guess, the parts of the brain that are doing different jobs for children at this age?
Yeah, so interesting. When I first did it, I was the most excited person in the room. Everyone else was eye-rolling and yawning. So I realised very quickly needed to make it more exciting. So I came up with this idea of animals representing key parts of the brain. And so, for instance, the amygdala, like you mentioned, we came up with this analogy of a guard dog. And so you think the guard dog is just doing its job. It is trying to keep a house safe. And sometimes the poor postman gets a really rough deal. And other times there might be a reason that there's a actual threat. And so what we teach kids about is most of the time, especially if you're at school, you are safe. And so your guard dog, there are things we can do to keep the guard dog nice and calm. And a really great analogy I like to give kids is asking your amygdala, your guard dog, to just question, just take a moment to question, is this a threat, a challenge, or an opportunity? And we actually have a song that's called 99 Times. So it turns out that 99 times it's not a threat. It's a challenge or an opportunity. But the thing is, it still feels the same. And so it's about kids. They might learn a positive affirmation like, this is safe, scary, not dangerous, scary. And the animals bring it to life because you think, okay, my guard dog, I've got this guard dog and it's just actually doing the best it can.
Okay, and the other parts of the brain that you referred to, you've got the wise owl, of course. We all need one of those.
Yes, we all need the wise owl. That's your prefrontal cortex. So that's that higher order thinking, trying to make good decisions, and still developing in children and teenagers. And then you have the reticular activating system, which we call the sifting sooty after the shearwater, that makes this incredible journey and has to have this astounding focus. And so we talk about how do we get our sifting sooty ready to learn in the class, ready to make good choices as well. There's so many distractions all the time. It might be with devices as well. So how can we train our reticular activating system to be here now? And it might be, what's one thing I can touch or taste or smell? And then we have the trusty elephant who tries really hard to remember, representing your hippocampus, and works very well when we sleep. And obviously it's the one that might let you down with forgetting your school hat or what have you. And then, one of my favorites actually is the sensitive octopus, because octopuses are just the most extraordinary creatures, as we know. And that represents the insular cortex. And really, if you think that's the kind of bodily sensations, you might get it when there is a bit of danger. You might get sweaty palms, or if you're nervous, but also it's the part of the brain that enables you to have empathy. So to imagine, how someone else might be feeling. So we often link the sensitive octopus with our friendship content, how you make a friend and keep a good friend, how you deal with conflict. And also just, looking around and imagining another person's perspective, which is, takes a long time, still working it on myself.
Knowing it exists is a good start, however. Let's talk about some of the situations that you work through in the book, typical setbacks that children face. And let's talk about the different ways. As I said, some will just bounce straight back. And some almost inevitably look for the learning and say, I'm going to do better next time, or I won't do that next time. And for others, it can just shut them down into a confidence loss. Give us some examples and then tell us a little bit more about how you talk to children depending on what their responses are to these challenges.
Well, if we're talking specifically about resilience, that's why the chapter is called, how to be resilient when you don't want to be. Because you ask anyone when they have a setback if they feel like being resilient, and they don't. It's the last thing you feel like being. And so what we try, we're all about prevention and practicing before the things arise. So if you think about resilience, we talk about it that it's not this elusive trait that only a lucky few have. And it's a bit, just if you imagine, it's a bit like filling up a tank, and ensuring that you are resilient before the thing even happens. So if you are doing the things that you love, if you're connecting with good friends, if you can name your emotions, if you have an awareness that bad and sad things happen to everyone, it's part of life. This all takes practice. So there's no point in the moment when there's the big setback or the sadness or grief to try and encourage people to be resilient or to bounce back then. It's not really the time. Instead, it's about more how are we taking care of ourselves every day so that we have a capacity for resilience? And a big thing is, I mean, you've got the wonderful Lucy Hone on your soil there in New Zealand, and she's taught me so many of these things. And one of the biggest things is that we can't be resilient on our own. So for children to know that themselves from a young age, that resilience is about surrounding yourself with good and reliable people, and even if it's just one trusted person, that we can't be resilient on our own. So that's why you do the whole roundabout thing of how do you make a friend, how do you keep a good friend, who can you turn to if you face a problem. And it's about building these daily habits, so that you do have more of a capacity when life inevitably throws you some things your way that you didn't really want.
It's not always events either. For some reason, at times, people just lose confidence, lose mojo, get bad feelings about themselves, thinks, I'm no good. And there's not necessarily an obvious trigger for it, right? So with kids, again, how do you sort of explain to them that those feelings, not just them, that those feelings are universal? And how do you help them work their way out of it, which includes for a time just sitting with it, right? Just feeling it.
Just sitting with it, just feeling it. We talk about feelings being like the weather, they come and go. It's about also the nuances of not shoving toxic positivity down a kid's throat to kind of be like onwards and upwards. There'll be another sunny day around the corner. Let them feel what they're feeling. I think, though, if that, this is very normal, and we can't panic too much if a kid's in a bit of a slump. If it's going on for a long time, then it can be more concerning, and if it's really impacting the family life. But I think even thinking about something like the idea of teaching kids that everybody has character strengths. So I'm not talking about self-esteem, telling a kid they're fantastic. I actually think that's detrimental if you're not giving them really specific evidence for what they've actually done. But if you think everybody, you and I, all of us, children too, we all have character strengths. So what particular character strength, when they're in a slump, could they maybe use to get them out of it? Maybe it's something like humor or gratitude or perseverance, but we've all got them, and we have them in different levels. So, I'm still growing patience for sure. And then there's other ones that are stronger for me, and same for children. And you can teach them this even just in books, brilliant picture and chapter books where there's a common theme. Characters go through big things. Characters sometimes face self-doubt, and the common threads is they use their strengths for good, and they have lovely people around them.
How do you mentioned the word fun? This is important too. Everyone can probably remember of a certain generation going to health class, in inverted commas.
Yeah.
This isn't meant to be all sort of serious, and this is about who we are and how we live and our value as kids. How do you make this stuff fun? Because there will be kids sitting there perhaps going bright red and with tears welling in their eyes as some of this stuff is traversed, and there'll be others who'll be poking fun at it and trying to be the swagger. What sorts of things can you do with kids to make this a fun exercise? And indeed, do you have some practical exercises for them?
I do, because, when I started out, I was really enthusiastic about teaching kids about resilience and well-being, and they were not as enthusiastic as I was. There was a lot of eye rolling and yawning, because well-being can be really grating and can be really boring. It doesn't have to be, as you said, but it absolutely can be. So stories, when you tell real stories about incredible humans, that makes it fun. Kids love a story. We have a whole kind of Guess Who series where we spotlight people, and kids have to listen to their story and, work out, okay, what are their character strengths? And even your most hardcore kid loves a story. People love a story. I think also actively encouraging kids to do the things that they love. And you can kind of go, well, aren't kids really good at that already? But you want them to have that now as a habit before they get busy and too cool for school. So joy, teaching them about what joy does to us, even on a cellular level, kids get excited about it. If you're in a room with kids and you start asking them what brings them joy, there is such a great contagious energy in the room of sparkling eyes and people wanting to share, oh my gosh, soccer or art or pottery, whatever it is. just thinking about actually joy is really great for our mental fitness. It's not a boring thing. Joy is a wonderful thing, and it can be fleeting, but it's just even thinking about it can make us feel better about life. We talk about, what was your glimmer moment, which is really the opposite of triggers, just a small moment in the day that brings you a sense of calm and makes you feel safe. It could be, your delicious breakfast, or you saw a cool bird on the way to school, or whatever it might be, these little micro moments. And what you're doing is you're teaching kids to start actively looking for the good, and that has this kind of upward spiral as well. Again, that's not boring for a kid to look for the good, as long as you're not in a moment when they're feeling really grumpy and over it saying, okay, what are you grateful for? I mean, it would be the most irritating question in the moment.
Yeah, that's the old validation thing. Just quickly,
Yes,
too, I mean, some kids are just natural Eeyores. And they're going to be fine. We need all personality types. I tend to be slightly kind of what's that word? Hyper alert, or hyper, like, on lookout for catastrophes, which is quite useful in my job. And you don't want to force a child to be some sunny little always happy daisy when that's just not who they are. You want them to be comfortable with who they are, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, absolutely. Oh gosh, yeah. And Pollyanna, the worst. This is why I just mentioned that the concept of toxic positivity. There's nuances to this, and absolutely, you be who you are. I do believe, though, that you can challenge unhelpful thinking styles. So if there is a constant thought that you're having that is not serving you, not all thoughts are facts, and even teaching that to a child is really beneficial. So we have another analogy, and I need to preface this with, I love sharks in the wild. They are incredible for our ecosystem. Big fan, not a big fan of shark thoughts. And so we teach kids that, if you're having a thought that bites you, that's, I'm not enough, I'm rubbish, it's so unfair, why me? It's not serving you. It's not helping you. And you can learn to replace it with a dolphin thought, a more helpful thought. Now, this is not about, denying someone's right to be sad and frustrated. It's those persistent, unhelpful thoughts that are really not getting you anywhere. And often they're about everyday problems.
Thank you, Alice. Much appreciated. Alice Peel, whose organisation helps with, it's a mental health venture that helps with kids building their understanding of their emotions and their resilience. She is herself also a teacher and has put together a book and a guide. I'm sure there'll be more details on our website. How to Be a Good Enough Kid, it's called.